Good morning, everybody. At least it's morning when I'm talking today. I don't know where it is, whether it's morning when you're listening or not. But anyway, I'm going to say hi and welcome back to the continuing story of Esther. And we are in Esther 2. And remember that last time we talked about how the king had gotten rid of his queen, Queen Vashti, because he was mad at her. And in a drunken rage, he sends out an edict, which cannot be revoked, that he wants to get rid of the queen and get a new queen. And so his people go out and find all the beautiful girls and bring them into a harem. And Esther, who is a Jew living in Babylonian captivity, she is living in Persia with her uncle named Mordecai, or cousin, who becomes her father figure. He has really adopted her, basically. So they're living there in Susa, which is the capital. And she is brought into the harem because she is so beautiful. And Mordecai has told her he doesn't think it's wise for her to tell everybody that she's a Jew. She has two names, Hadassah, which is her Jewish name, and then she's known by Esther. So she goes by the name Esther, and she doesn't tell anybody that she's a Jew. I think this is interesting because you're going to see later, too, that there are ways that we can show people how much we love God without being in your face about it. So right now, it's better for her not to say that she's a child of God, not to talk about it outright, and let people just see that from within her. And already we've noticed that because Haggai, who was the eunuch who's in charge of the harem, has already kind of got his eye on her and singled her out that she's pretty special. He's given her more attendance, he's given her extra things, and he's put her in a prominent place in the harem. So this describes the beauty regimen that she is going to have. This is in verse 12 of Esther 2. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, this means, I'm going to switch. This is the New International Version. I'm going to switch to the New Living Translation because I like it better for the explanation of this. When in the New International Version it says she's getting ready with all these spa treatments before she goes into him. And what the New Living Version translates it a little differently. This, in verse 12, said, before each young woman was taken to the king's bed. So that makes it a little different, doesn't it? They know they're going to become concubines, and they're all virgins, remember? All these women in the harem, these beautiful women who've been brought there. So this is from the New Living Translation, but it's still Esther 2, verse 12. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments. 6 months with the oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with special perfumes and ointments. When it was time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. And that evening she would be taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning she was brought to a second harem where the king's wives lived. There she would be under the care of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. She would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. So there's lots of information here. First of all, this is like a big spa treatment she goes to. You and I would love a year of spa treatments, but we wouldn't like it if we knew that it was in preparation to become a concubine. And that's what these young virgins had in their future. So they were treated very well. They had all this jewelry, they had all this clothing, they had spa treatments, they had oil of myrrh and all kinds of wonderful things that were given to them to make them even more beautiful and more desirable for the king. So eventually each of them would take their turn going into the king, and then once they had been with the king, they didn't come back to that harem. They went to a new place with a new eunuch in charge, and that was a place where all the wives and concubines lived. So here's the thing about that, is that they were allowed to take with them from that first harem anything they wanted. Clothes, jewelry, everything, anything, okay? Because they weren't going back there. They were going to go to the palace and then to the second harem. So it was important that they could take things with them. So the other thing that's important in this passage is that a woman, once she had been sent to the king, could never again go back to him unless he specifically said, I want, and mentioned their name. Okay? So the king is the only one that can call them to him. The women cannot request that they see the king. That would be against the law. And that's very important later in the story. So now we are on verse 15. And again, we're going to talk specifically now about Esther. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, who was Mordecai's uncle. And Mordecai had adopted his younger cousin Esther. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Haggai the eunuch in charge of the harem. She asked for nothing except what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. I think this whole passage right here is very telling if you really look closely, because first of all, it talks about Esther's heritage. It mentions her father and her uncle so that we remember now that she's a child of God. She's a Jew. That's the first thing. Then the second thing is when it was her turn, instead of going around and just, grabbing as much jewelry, clothing as she could, or being very materialistic or interested in what she could get out of this, instead, with a lot of humility, she went to the eunuch that was in charge, Haggai, and she said to him, what do you think I need to take? What would you suggest? And the advice he gave her, she followed it. She didn't take anything else other than what he said she should take. She showed in her spirit her godly qualities. She didn't have to say, I'm a godly person. She just acted like it. She was humble enough to accept advice, and then she wasn't materialistic and grabbing a bunch of things. She really wanted to do what was right. And look at the result. The result is in verse, what would it be? Verse 15. The end of verse 15. She was admired by everyone who saw her. I can still remember my mother telling me when I was young, Karen, you get more with honey than you do with vinegar. I was kind of a vinegar girl, I think. But my mom wanted me to realize that sometimes you could step back and be a little bit more compromising to people, or a little bit more kind, really, and humble, and not always feel like you had to be in somebody's face about things. So Esther is this kind of person. She doesn't push herself forward, but she doesn't have to, because God's going to do that work. All she has to do is be a child of God, and that light of her beauty, her inner beauty, kind of shines out, and people see it. And they think, she's got something special. They may not know it's God at first, but they know that inside she's beautiful. I love the verses in the New Testament that give us a little clue about this as well. First is Matthew 5:14-16, and I'm sure you've heard this many times before, but you may not think of it in this way. You are the light of the world, a town built on a hill that cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So what this verse is saying is sometimes we don't have to be with our mouths flapping at people, telling them, you should pray or you should go to church. We need to let our light shine. And our light could be our kindness, our love. It can also be telling the good news about Christ, but at the right time, in the right place. If we start out meeting people's needs and showing the light that's inside us, they will see something, and like a moth, they're drawn to that light. And so we don't hide our light, we show our light. And that's exactly what Esther was doing. Something inside her was shining because people were reacting to it, and she wasn't really doing anything that special. Sometimes, I told you before, Sometimes I go to the Message translation of the Bible, which is a modern translation, a paraphrase really of the Bible. And I don't use it for my everyday study, but I do like to go to it once in a while and read it because it gives a different slant on the same verse. So the verse that I just read, this is the way it's translated in the Message version, which is Matthew 5:16 in the Message. Here's another way to put it. You're here to be light, bringing out the God colors of the world. God is not a secret to be kept. We're going public with this, as public as a city on the hill. If I make you light bearers, you don't think I'm going to hide you under a bucket, do you? I'm putting you on a light stand. Now I've put you there on a hilltop, on a light stand. Shine. Keep open house. Be generous with your lives. Be opening up to others. You will prompt people to open up with God, this generous Father in heaven. I just love that translation of opening up our lives, and then that draws people in and says, you know, they're more attracted to the love of Jesus. And if they see it in our kindness, in our love. So this is what Esther is doing here, is she is showing the love of God by just how she acts. And she's modeling that, and people admire her for it. So if we go back and look now, what's going to happen is Esther is going to be taken in to King Xerxes' royal presence. And it says, Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in early winter of the 7th year of his reign. And the king loved Esther more than any of the other young women. So even the king now is being enraptured by Esther's beautiful inner light. Not just her beauty. I'm sure he had tons of beautiful women around. So it isn't just her outside beauty. There's something about her. There's something about her. And God has used that something to put her in the right place at the king's side. And she is going to be instrumental later in the story from that position. So it's kind of like the old song, Bloom Where You're Planted, you know. She needs to bloom where she's planted, even though it wouldn't have been her first choice to be taken to the harem or to be married off to the king or to be his favorite. She can do great things from that position, and that's where God wants her. And sometimes God wants us exactly where he's put us. And if we're open and humble and willing to do that, our light can shine no matter where we are. So I wish you a great day of your light shining. Have a good one. Bye-bye.